What is going on, everybody? It's Clint from the DieHardMMA Podcast, presented to you by Pub Sports Radio, and this is the total takedown for UFC 264. That's right, once again, we are back. We're talking overs, we're talking unders. We go back through the card. Instead of picking a side, we're looking at over or under to try to find a different angle and potentially put some extra cash in your pocket for the big fights this week. First off, do me a favor, share the video, smash the like button. Y'all know the drill at this point. Let's get into the card. We've got a middleweight fight kicking off the night. Yao Zhang Hu taking on Alan Amedovski. Both these guys have been gone for a really long time. We haven't seen either one, so we're expecting potentially improvements from both. They both are finishers. They both have been finished. Yao Zhang Hu has only 5 UFC fights, or 5 MMA fights, period. So little experience, and we got a total here set at 1.5. The over is minus 150. The under is plus 130. I'm kind of leaning towards the over on this one simply because Hu is such a young man. He's such a young fighter. He went out and spent some time at Tiger Muay Thai. Everybody's raving about the improvements that he's made. If that's the case, if he is a slicker striker, if he's better on the feet, then this is probably going to be a little bit more of a chess match. What we've seen previously from him is he's very hittable. He doesn't move his head. He's going to be the bigger athlete of the two, and while Alan Amedovski does have plenty of knockout power, if this kid is at all any more elusive than we have seen before, then it's going to take Alan a little bit more time to get him out of there, and it won't necessarily be a 2-minute fight if Hu does this correctly. But these are wild assumptions that we're making because we really haven't seen either of these guys in a long time, and Alan Amedovski could have made improvements himself, so this is not a fight that I suggest betting either way or laying chalk on, especially because we just have no clue what the game plan is coming into this fight for either of these men. Second fight on the card, Zhalgas Zhumagulov taking on Jerome Rivera. We can save a little bit of time on this one. Total set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is minus 220. The under 2.5 is plus 180. And the only way I can look here is over. Both these guys have over tendencies. Jerome Rivera is a guy that's got a lot of submissions on his record. Let's be clear, you're not submitting Zhalgas Zhumagulov. Zhalgas on the other side of this thing, while he can finish, he's not a brutal power puncher, and Jerome Rivera is going to have lots of height and reach and range advantages here in this fight. We're in the big cage, so I think that plays more towards Rivera, and this could be very well a point striking style of fight. If Zhalgas Zhumagulov goes for the takedowns and gets this thing on the floor, Jerome Rivera does have the opportunity for a submission. Sure, Zhalgas could TKO him, but I think both of those are a bit longer shots. So I would expect this one to go over, and I would be looking at the over on that one, but not planning on laying minus 200 on it. One more point is it's a flyweight fight. Generally speaking, flyweights are the ones that go the distance, not quite as much power at that weight class. So yeah, I'm thinking over. Middleweight fight up next. Omari Akhmedov taking on Brad Tavares. Total once again set at 2.5. The over is minus 245. The under is plus 205. And I would lean again to the over on this one. Omari Akhmedov is a guy that really relies on his grappling. He's got some big power punches, he's got some bombs, but he's not really a knockout guy more often than not. He can get off with some good solid ground and pound, but the problem is Brad Tavares. This guy's impossible to take down. If you do get him down, he's even harder to keep down. So I expect Brad Tavares to use that big octagon to his advantage, keep the footwork, make this thing a standing affair, and stay safe when he gets pinned up against the cage, when he gets taken down. He's constantly going to be working to get back up on his feet. He knows exactly what he needs to do. So this is a spot where I think Brad Tavares really forces this into the deeper rounds and potentially makes it all the way to the judges' scorecards. Omari Akhmedov's gas tank is a big question mark for me. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing ends late in maybe the third round or something like that when Brad Tavares has a chance to get off a little bit more on the feet. But Omari has been more often than not durable enough to make it to the judges' cards, even when he's on the downslide. So I'm expecting over. Again, I'm tempted to sprinkle that round 3 prop finish for Brad Tavares, so I'm not necessarily looking to bet the over 2.5 because that's a very, very small window of when I'd want the fight to get finished, but that's the way I'd have to look. Women's flyweight fight, Jennifer Maia taking on Jessica Eye. And really, the only person capable of finishing in this fight would be Jennifer Maia. Her ground game is slick. That armbar from guard is always present in every single fight. Jennifer Maia's got some good, tight boxing, but Jessica Eye has been very durable her entire career. It took a head kick from the one and only Valentina Shevchenko to put her down. Jessica Eye capable of ground and pounding somebody, maybe capable of submitting somebody, but we generally don't see it. She's more of a grinder. She's a bully. She uses that physical and size advantage to get it done. So I expect her to try and do that here and bully Maia around. She's got to just keep her arms safe. As long as she doesn't follow her to the ground or get an arm caught or something like that, Jessica Eye should be competitive enough in this fight and be able to take everything Jennifer Maia puts on the table, because as much as her boxing is sharp, it is tight, she's not a power striker. So I don't expect the knockout to come from Jennifer Maia. This one's going over. Total set at 2.5, minus 340 to the over, plus 280 to the under. If you're thinking under, you might as well just take Jennifer Maia. You might as well just take her by submission, because I don't really see any finish coming from Jessica Eye unless she gets some kind of wild TKO stoppage. That's kind of the only way I could see that taking place, and really don't expect it to happen. Middleweight fight up next. Preliminary card, Trevin Giles taking on Dricus du Plessis. And this fight has everything on the table. So total set here at 2.5. Over 2.5 is minus 115. The under 2.5 is minus 105. In some places, the under 2.5 is minus 120. So the market a little confused on whether or not they like the over 2.5 or the under 2.5 here on this one. And I get it. Trevin Giles is a guy that's got really fast hands, a really nice jab. You can see him working people over with that. It opens up the opportunity for the knockout. Dricus, a guy that's got a 100% finish rate in his fights. Never seen the judges' scorecards win or lose. So he's going to be pushing the action, pushing the pace. Trevin Giles has been very, very durable throughout his career. His 2 losses have been by submission, both in the 3rd round. So we got to be looking directly at that 2.5 number here, and it's highly questionable as to whether or not it's going over or under. I'm leaning under myself. I do think that Dricus is a problem. I think his finishing ability and the holes in Trevin Giles' game are going to open opportunities for him to get the finish and get it done. He's a guy that regularly trains and fights for 5-round fights, so a 3-round fight really shouldn't be an issue. And we've seen Trevin Giles' gas tank be a problem. I think Trevin is always going to be live for that finish, especially late in the fight when he starts to gas out. But we do have to remember that Dricus has been knocked out before, and someone with fast hands like Giles could be another one to get it done. But it's going to come right into that 3rd round range. I don't see either of these guys getting it done early necessarily, unless one of them makes a big mistake. So the under 2.5, I would lean under, but it's very sketchy in this spot. That's about exactly where I line the fight. I expect it to end in the first couple minutes of the 3rd round, if I'm being honest. So not sure I'm going to be playing that one from a betting perspective, but for the sake of the pick, I'm going to say under. Featherweight fight, Ryan Hall taking on Ilia Topuria. One of the most interesting fights here on the board, in my opinion. Total set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is even money, plus 100. The under 2.5 is minus 120. Juiced all the way down to minus 150 in some places. People are expecting Ilia Topuria to come in here and just absolutely run through Ryan Hall. The other category is expecting Ryan Hall to grab an ankle lock or a heel hook and end this thing himself. I kind of see it the exact opposite. I think this is a big step up for Topuria. He's got the wrestling advantage, but he's a slick jiu-jitsu player himself. I think he's going to mind his P's and Q's and stay safe. Ryan Hall is going to be trying to stay safe on the feet and either striking with his spinning attacks from distance or flopping to his back, rolling for ankle locks and things like that when he gets in close, when he gets in tight. I think this is going to be either a point fighting match on the feet where I don't expect Ryan Hall to be able to finish Topuria with strikes, or it's going to be a grappling match where, yeah, either of these guys potentially could get submitted, but I don't really see it. They both have been able to be sharp enough, defensive enough. I don't think that changes this weekend. I would expect Ilia Topuria's wrestling to come into play and maybe slow down the pace and kind of grind on Hall while they're on the ground, with Hall not really having the opportunity to actually get a finish off. But Topuria is a brash young kid that could easily slip up and easily make a mistake. He's also a brash young kid with a lot of power. So if he manages to catch Hall and stun him with anything on the ground, that TKO is there. So I'm looking over 2.5, and I'm actually very tempted to bet this one. I think that the recency bias of these guys is kind of giving this line to us, and I think there's some value on that over for it to go to the judges' scorecards. But again, it's one that I'm debating. I'm not sure that I'm pulling the trigger on just yet, but I would be looking over. Welterweight fight, Michel Pereira taking on Niko Price. Total here set at 2.5. Over 2.5 is plus 110. Under 2.5 is minus 130. And again, this is one that's taken some action other places. I see minus 175 to the under 2.5, which is just crazy in my opinion. Niko Price is an absolute wild man. He comes out and he pushes a pace and he puts it on people. He's got that death touch. He's been relatively durable, but he gets hit a lot. Michel Pereira is a guy that is explosive. He hits hard. He's a wild man himself, but recently we've seen him lock it up and slow things down. He's been a bit more slow-paced, picks his shots, things like that. But Niko in a recent interview talked about how he's put away the weed. He has quit. He's not smoking anymore. That's led him to be more focused. He's got more energy, which, believe it or not, he said is transitioning into even better cardio than we've seen from him before, which is just absolutely insane. He said he's also focusing on being a champion. He's working with Colby Covington, which is a massive boon to him. And if you take that championship mindset, we saw this with Justin Gaethje. He turned into a completely different beast when he decided he wanted to be a champion. Niko Price is on record saying that he's looking at being more defensively minded. He's not taking all the power shots anymore. He's not going out on his shield anymore. And that's something that I factored into this fight, is that we're going to see the same old Niko. If Niko is telling the truth, if what he's saying is accurate, and we see a more paced Niko Price, we see a more defensively minded Niko Price, a guy that's picking his shots more so than just throwing every wet noodle at the wall and hoping one of them sticks, this is a completely different fight than I expected to see when this thing played out in my head. I'm kind of leaning more towards the over 2.5 at this point, but I'm not touching this fight from a totals perspective because both these guys can land anything at any time. Pereira is incredibly hard to put down. Niko Price is incredibly hard to put down. He's only been knocked out by some of the biggest power strikers in the division. So if these guys are both managing their pace, if both of them are being defensive, there's a chance that neither of them find that perfect sweet spot, and both their durability kicks in and this fight makes it to the judges' scorecard. So I'm leaning over 2.5 at this point, but because both of them bring so much firepower to the table, it could be over in an instant. Either one of these guys could win in the first round with one big shot. So I'm definitely not touching this one from a totals perspective, but the lean is over. Carlos Condit taking on Max Griffin to close out the preliminary portion of this card. And again, I'm going to have to look at the over. Total set at 2.5. Minus 200 to the over, plus 170 to the under. And again, while these guys both have finishing ability, I think Max Griffin's finishing ability is a little overblown. It's something he's been doing recently, but not something he did prior to that. I think he's gotten a couple of good shots off. I wouldn't expect him to be this knockout machine for the rest of his career. Carlos Condit is a guy that you simply don't knock out. It just doesn't happen. He is very slick with his offensive submission game. Max Griffin has never been submitted. So the way that these two guys link up, I think that Max Griffin's going to rely on the grappling. I think Carlos Condit is going to look for the striking. And since they're both playing to the defensive strength of their opponent, I expect it to go over. I don't think either of these guys is going to get the finish, and we'll have a decision on our hands. Minus 200 to the over 2.5 is the way that I would be looking on that fight. Main card time, we're kicking off the pay-per-view portion of the evening. Sean O'Malley taking on UFC newcomer Kris Moutinho. This is a very interesting fight. Total here set at 1.5. Over 1.5 is plus 150. Under 1.5 is minus 170. All that money coming in on the under. Both these guys are pretty slick strikers. You know, Kris, he's getting definitely disrespected by this betting number coming in this week, but he's not as bad as a lot of people would make him out to be, in my opinion. Sean O'Malley, we know how slick this kid is on the feet. He himself has predicted a round 2 finish, and I think that's accurate. I talked about on my podcast about how he likes to play with his food. I don't think he's going to come out and put this kid to shame, blow him out of the water in the first round. I think that'd be disrespectful to Kris. Kris, with this big opportunity on his hands, knows what he's getting into. I don't think he's one of these guys that's going to run out and look for a quick KO with the first punch. I think he actually believes that he can compete with someone like Sean O'Malley, and if that's the case, we're going to see a measured Kris that's going to come out and attempt to win a 15-minute fight. If Sean O'Malley is playing with his food, if Kris is anywhere near UFC ready, this fight's going over. And I would look at that over 1.5 at plus 150. We are dealing with bantamweights. The bantamweight division has gotten crazy lately. Obviously, these guys are capable of knockouts and things like that, but Sean O'Malley's a guy that's been knocking out some older fighters that are towards the ends of their careers. This kid, Kris, even though he has been knocked out before, is young, is in his prime, and if he knows what he's doing, if he minds his P's and Q's, I think he can at least get us into the second round. I kind of feel like this fight ends in the second round, so that 1.5 again is pushing it, but getting plus 150 on it, I can absolutely see that being the side. So I'd be looking over at that nice little plus line, fading the recency bias and the hype of one Sugar Sean O'Malley. Women's fight up next, Irene Aldana taking on Yana Kunitskaya. Total 2.5, over 2.5 is minus 300, under 2.5 is plus 250. Gotta look over. This is not one of those women's fight where we can flip the script on its head here. I think Irene Aldana has got some serious pop on her punches. The knockout is definitely live. Yana Kunitskaya on the ground could potentially be a problem for Irene Aldana, but neither of them really give up the finishes easily. I think this is going to be a very competitive back and forth fight. I think Irene Aldana is capable of the finish. I would lean more to her side in this case, but Yana Kunitskaya's grappling could definitely pay off and be the difference. Irene Aldana, though, pretty slick on the ground herself, so I don't know if Kunitskaya is going to be able to muster enough damage to get this thing done. Since I think only one of the two is really capable of getting a finish, I can't play the under 2.5, and I'd rather just roll with that side. If you were looking for Aldana by KO, TKO or something, that's plus 400, plus 450. So I would look more that way than playing the under 2.5 personally. Definitely not a total I'm interested in from a betting perspective, but I'll say over. Heavyweight fight up next, Tuivasa taking on Greg Hardy. Total here set at 1.5. The over 1.5 is minus 175. The under 1.5 is plus 155. They're looking for that classic heavyweight over, and I can't disagree with it. Greg Hardy's adopted kind of a point fighting style. Tuivasa is a guy that he's hell on wheels in that first round. He really is. And his leg kicks are something that could be very much a problem for Greg Hardy. Hardy struggled with the leg kicks his last couple of fights. We saw Hardy throw in the towel. He's been known to do that before. I don't know if Greg has enough power to put out Tuivasa. I don't know that Greg Hardy can wrestle with Tuivasa. I think Ty is the finishing side for this fight. I think the leg kicks are going to be a problem, but Hardy is much bigger than Tuivasa is. So if he doesn't get off on those leg kicks and get Greg Hardy out of there with some kind of a TKO with the calf kick, I think this thing goes over. I don't want to lay minus 175 with these big boys because anything can happen in the heavyweight division. If it was minus 125, maybe we'd be having a different conversation. I'd say over 1.5, but I'm not touching minus 175 on that price tag. Co-main event, Gilbert Burns taking on Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and I just spoke about hell on wheels in round one. Whew, Gilbert Burns is hell on wheels in round one. This guy brings everything to the table. Total here set at 2.5. Over 2.5 is minus 140. Under 2.5 is plus 120. And I'm interested in a violence bet on this one. I really am. So Gilbert Burns is a guy that he almost knocked out Kamaru Usman. I mean, nobody's done that. He had Kamaru hurt badly. He is explosive. That check left hand that he's developed is impressive, and apparently he's a world-class jiu-jitsu black belt. Who knew? This guy is so slick on the ground. If he manages to get Thompson down, Wonderboy is in a big amount of trouble. Thompson's a slick striker. We've seen Gilbert Burns get cracked on the feet before, and the pace that Burns sets is something that I can see Thompson sticking and moving, taking advantage of, and maybe knocking him out in second or third round. So giving me a 2.5 at a plus price with both guys more than capable of finishing. We've seen Wonderboy knocked out by Anthony Pettis of all people. Burns is more explosive and hits harder than Pettis by a long shot. We've seen Burns knocked out. Thompson's pinpoint accuracy is gonna be a problem for him. Both guys can get finished. Both guys can finish. The under 2.5 is a spot that I'm very interested in the co-main event, and that one may actually be making my betting card here. Main event time. Totals are all over the board on this one. And if you follow me, you know this was one of my favorite plays, and we locked in and beat a big line movement already. I've got 2.5 units on the over 1.5 in the first round. We got that at minus 170 back when it first opened up for us. I know some sharp people that got in all the way at like minus 135 way back when it first came out. I got it as soon as I could, and I wish I could have got a better number, but that's all was available for me. Now the over 1.5 is minus 210. Absolutely everybody that knows what they're talking about is on this over 1.5. The last fight went over 1.5. We're going to see a trilogy fight, which means both these guys are going to be fighting not to lose at the beginning. They're going to feel each other out. It's going to be a bit more respectful, a bit more slow of a process. The stakes are higher, so because of that, we're going to see this thing slow down. And even though both guys bring more than enough finishing power to the table, they're going to respect the finishing power of their opponent. Neither guy is going to want to put themselves in a position where they can get hurt. So I'm going crazy on this one. I've got 2.5 units on the over 1.5 for a cashier of 2 units. I put 1 unit on the over 2.5, and I got plus 115 on that. That is now even money or minus 105. I put 1 unit on the over 3.5, which is plus 155 still, plus 165, and I think that's about where I got it. Now, I'm not Oh no, I got it at over plus 200. The plus 3.5, or the over 3.5 rounds has come down as well. Now the over 4.5, that one's plus 200, plus 240, depending on where I get it. Fight goes to decision is plus 220. I'm tempted to go on those two, but knowing the violence that these two are capable of, knowing McGregor's tendency to slow down and wear out later in fights, I expect one of these guys to end up getting a finish late in the fight. I'm kind of feeling maybe by decision. And those numbers are very, very tempting to me. But as long as we get to the third round of this fight, if we cash the over 1.5 and the over 2.5, we're sitting pretty on the profit. And if we get that over 3.5, I will take it gladly and run to the bank. But that's the one that I'm a little sketched out on and not necessarily sure if we're going to be able to cash. I don't know if I can endorse the over 1.5 at a 2-to-1 clip. The way these guys fight, the plus 170 on the under 2.5, that's a whole lot of value for some serious violence that these guys are capable of. I don't know you should lay necessarily quite that much chalk. The 2.5 here, where it's more of a pick 'em price tag, I would definitely still look over 2.5 on that one. It's going to be close. It's going to be hairy. That one may not turn out so well in hindsight, but I'm going to be looking at the overs. I know there's a lot of people looking at the unders. The 3.5 is where things get exceptionally sketchy. Hits minus 175 or minus 225 in places. I would not be laying that kind of chalk, but I can absolutely understand why people think it's not going to go 4 full rounds. So there you have it, folks. That is the total takedown for UFC 264. Make sure you hit me up on Twitter at DieHardMMA Pod. Subscribe here to Pub Sports Radio if you haven't already, and we will see you tomorrow for the undefeated post-weigh-in show. Let's roll.